I think when Rishi asked me, would you consider hosting this forum, it just took me a minute. We do tremendous amount of work on this topic. I have a personal interest in financial inclusion as a member of G20 Task Force on Financial Inclusion. It's slightly wider than what we are talking here. Financial inclusion has much interest for 4 billion in humanity who have been left behind, who don't have access to savings, credit, insurance, or investments. And how do you solve that problem at the bottom of the pyramid? And how do you bring innovation around that? Tons of amount of work has been done. Governments have to play a critical part on it. India has succeeded in opening 350 million bank accounts because we have to pay claims to someone and you'd rather have bank accounts to pay that. It becomes much easier. The policy framework is very, very important, and Alex from his experience hopefully will share his experience spending time in Africa, in Kenya, primarily. So we'll zero down on where insurance really matters. AON has been deeply involved, be it in terms of climate, as you know. We have around 300, 400 climate scientists who are digitizing it, making it easier for the communities to bring in capital around there. We're doing embedded insurance, we're doing parametric at scale in terms of earthquake to on a micro basis. How do you do parametric products for credit lending without collateral? How do you do it on a cash flow basis? And how do you use other distribution around it? So tons of activity happens around it. And we have some real people from AON coming later. My friend Emma will come around and she does a great amount of work for Red Cross and things go around and how parametric and other solutions and poolings of capital, reducing the cost of capital to make things happen, which come around and play. So it's delighted, Rishi, thank you for asking AON to do it. As you said, I didn't know that AON does so much. We do. We should be better in advertising. Thank you. Could I ask everyone to introduce themselves and we'll build on the conversation, if that's fine?
Thank you, Anand. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alex Mill. I'm a UK diplomat who's currently, I've just got back from a posting in Kenya for 3 years, and I'm now working on Secondment at City UK, which is a financial services kind of advocacy group. And I started my career at Lloyds, incidentally, and I've always been at the intersection between private and public sector, promoting financial inclusion, regulatory environments and regimes, and new products and things like that. So I hope I can lend a kind of public sector government perspective to discussions this evening.
All right, so my name is Matilda Strong. My name tag says Strong, which I appreciate, but it's Strong, S-T-R-O-N. I'm a second-time founder of what you might call like impact insurance business. So my first business, which I started in 2010 together with another co-founder, was what is called BMAT. We are a micro-insurance and telemedicine provider across Africa, Asia, Latin America. 5.5 million paying customers buying life and health insurance and like full primary healthcare services for on average $2 or $3 a month. The second business, which I now joined the founding team of at the end of last year, is in the climate space, but using insurance to insure carbon credits and investments in carbon reductions or carbon removals. Using a first of its kind licensed balance sheet, which will have carbon credits as its balance sheet, meaning that in order for us to reach our climate goals, we really need tons of carbon to be the currency. So that if somebody like a Microsoft wants to reach net zero by 2030, they're investing in 5 million carbon credits in 2030, but investing in it today, if for some reason only 4 million have been issued because of extreme temperatures or a windstorm or whatever it is that has caused the delay, we can pay out and make them whole in carbon credits. So we're working with a Swiss regulator to create a first of its kind insurance license that allows this tons of carbon to be the currency that we hold on our balance sheet. So yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Carla Jordan. I represent a company called Santam Specialist Business UK. We're the London operation of the South African insurer Santam, and the largest short-term insurer on the African continent, with businesses through a Santam Alliance partnership in 33 countries across Africa, giving us access to Siemens on the ground and the ability to externalize premium in countries where it's sometimes quite tricky to do so. So I've been working in insurance for 25 years now, mostly in the corporate property space, and yeah, here invited by Anand this evening, so thank you, and I hope I can give a little bit of an insurance spin to perhaps what we're talking about this evening, and my own experiences living in South Africa for 40 years. And obviously financial inclusion is a massive part of what Santam, in terms of its ESG and CSI initiatives, have been trying to work on over the years.
Good, thank you, Karen. Alex, should we start with your thoughts and experiences on it from the government perspective?
It's funny, as I just said, started at Lloyd's, that was about 15 years ago now, and I'm just reflecting on, at that point, everyone was very excited about BRICS and emerging markets, and there was a curve that was going to be followed on financial inclusion and growth and everything, and well, that hasn't happened. But for one thing, in fact, growth in many areas, many emerging markets is a lot lower than it kind of needs to be to lift people out of poverty and to really create proper safety nets. And so I think Parametric, for one thing, not to say it's the panacea, but actually as a kind of technological innovation, which is kind of becoming apparent to help this situation. I think it has a really big impact. And one of my things is actually that everyone gets very excited about fintech and green finance, and actually people need to start seeing Parametric as fintech and assisting with green finance. So one of my big points to whenever I speak to an audience like this is actually about the messaging and how this is being communicated to governments and consumers and other things, because I think that particularly in this context, link up with development sector and what they're doing on financial inclusion is extremely important, and there's a real kind of lack of cohesion of efforts that I think we see loads of great companies, loads of great pilots, lots of things, but I think there could be a bit kind of a greater role there from particularly Western donors and governments and development sector on helping to put Parametric at the kind of forefront. So that's one thing I would say. What comes up in financial inclusion anywhere is relevant products for populations, individuals, and with the increasing amount of data and satellite data and analytics and AI that's coming on stream, that gives a great opportunity to really give kind of Parametric some legs in that respect and create the most relevant product possible. And the last thing I would just mention, which has been touched on, but and it's a bit boring, but you need that conducive regulatory environment for growth and progressive regulators and regulation, and those that are willing to actually experiment. I think here we've been seen as a model in the UK for just having a sandbox and a regulator. We actually helped to fund one in Kenya for InsurTech specifically, and that's kind of still continued to grow, but definitely more can be done around that, and that will become an increasing issue, particularly treatment of data, I think, as things get more sophisticated. Maybe there's one that someone can pick up on that, I don't know.
Matilda, do you mind? I know I saw from the list there were some students also. It's a very diverse community which is here. Just to set the scene, what is parametric insurance, and then we can go deeper, just to cover all the bases.
Yeah, I was saying that the security guard downstairs just asked me what parametric is, and so I already gave a 2-minute intro to it. I'll give you guys maybe a different example to what I gave them. So, you know, normal insurance, if you think of your health or your life insurance, if you go to make a claim, you are making an individual claim. The insurer is verifying that and paying you based on what you specifically have what it's cost you, right? What Parametric does is it chooses a trigger point. So in this case, you know, instead of a health insurance that covers you for your individual event, if there is a declared pandemic, then everybody gets $50 in their account. And you don't even have to, in many cases, you don't even have to make the claim. Everyone gets paid. And in the case for nature or natural climate kind of related topics, it's really popular because for farmers who are all subject to, for example, too much rainfall or too little rainfall or an extreme temperature one year, instead of each farmer having to come and make a claim, you say, you know, based on the data, if there's been X amount of millimeters of rainfall, we know that there will probably be damage to your crops. Instead of doing a verification of each one of those farmers' fields, we're just going to pay everybody out. And so, as you can hear, sort of climate-related factors are ones which really lend themselves very well to a kind of parametric triggers. And so, you know, the most common types really are when it's weather-related, earthquakes and natural disasters and things like that is where parametric is used most commonly. And in our case, for Carbon Pool, we actually are using the parametric option because when you're looking at carbon projects, you know, how does somebody know, or how do we know how much carbon has been sequestered over a 5-year period by a forest that is growing? What project developers need to do is do something called a verification report. It's very expensive. They need to go and like take a soil sample, figure out how much carbon is in there, take a sample from a tree, measure it. And so they don't want to do that all the time. And if there's a small fire in their forest, you don't want to have to do, you know, an independent verification of that and for all the forests around. And so what you end up doing is deciding on a trigger point and saying we will pay out if there has been a fire of X magnitude. We will pay out based on a formula that we've agreed in advance. And that formula, that in our case, we're basically saying, let's say if 50% of a forest burns down, you might lose 25% of the sequestered carbon. And, you know, our climate scientists are working out how much carbon sequestered do you lose if there's a fire. You might lose half of the trees, but you don't lose half of the carbon, for example. And so there's a formula for a trigger of how many carbon credits you would be owed in return in case that happens. So yeah, that's an example of a use case, I suppose, in parametrics, both globally, but also for carbon in particular, the way that we're using it.
I don't know if any of you know about the parametric projects that were triggered through the recent earthquakes in Morocco, but they had 2 pools there that were actually triggered, an uninsured and an insured pool. And I think one of the things around those parametric products is that once the trigger has been triggered, it's a very quick process. So the reinsurers in those instances had 7 days to pay the claims. So that money goes straight, can be moved out to people very quickly and can help people much quicker than in a normal indemnifiable claim where you may be sitting sort of a couple of years. If you think of COVID claims, for example, that 2 or 3 years post the event we're still not settled. Whereas in a parametric environment, it's very quick. Something that Santam is looking to do, actually in the agri space, is more around subsistence farming in Africa. So where people have very small plots of their own land that they're farming, and how, you know, if their crop gets destroyed by an extreme weather event, that's their livelihood and their family's food. That could be their family's food for the year that's gone in one instance, and they don't necessarily have the money to plant more seeds or to buy anything more. And so, you know, these are sort of products, if you're looking mass products that could go across and into very poor rural areas, provided that you can get a cell phone or smartphone. The penetration is not always there in Africa, but provided you can get some sort of way for people to geocode themselves and to put themselves into an area, then as soon as those events happen, and there's a parametric product in place, then they can be reimbursed really very quickly and get their family back on track. These are people who live way below the breadline, so that's really important for them.
So Parametric is truly, truly important for AON from two perspectives. One is improving penetration, and how do you get to the poorest for them to get back to their livelihoods? Because it really impacts them very much harder. And we think parametric-based products, climate and non-climate, requires innovation and can be created in very efficient manners. Governments love it if you can do it, and if you can solve the problems which are related to parametric, and it can win elections if you can do at a time where you can give some income protection, or if a hurricane is coming, you put $100 as an evacuation order comes in, and you put $100 to the pocket of people around, so they can just get around it. And it doesn't cost high limits. And when Carla and I are discussing, we talk about limits and explosions and millions and billions and trillions. So you can actually solve the problems of real people in real manner. We think income protection, finally everything is about income protection, whatever you call it. The trigger can be redundancy, and it can be linked to your EMI if you have a scooter in Indonesia or whatever. How do you create products which move your center and you're unable to pay? And sometimes banks will subsidize it. If you can create an experience, there's got a natural advantage because your loss adjustment expenses are not there. In traditional insurances, of the $100 which is paid by insurers, or the real money, sorry, £100 which is paid by by a customer, only 50 pounds is left to pay the claims after you take out distribution, loss adjustment expenses and others. So only $50 is working back to customers. But you need to know the trigger and how much income they pay and payment mechanisms. Those are happening. We are launching a product where we're saying if the rainfall is X, above that level, you get a new car off business, you'll be paid. If a monsoon season is coming in, we are creating products around that. So, but it's with the focus at that level. At the bigger level, we are working with governments to create pools of capacities to solve that problem, because the cost of capital becomes cheaper, and government has got a good calling power. So we need to find distribution channels which are already where these products can ride on. Climate is a very, very big topic because the data is much more granular to satellites, to other things. But the exciting projects running around across in 120 countries, at least I'm involved in 7 or 8 personally. And hopefully my colleague Emma will talk about different dimensions around it. Sorry, I know I've overrun. He's looking at me very angrily.
I think the thing that you bring up where this space is exciting is, and to bring up the topic of the year, AI, right? And the tech companies that are coming up that will actually, I think, enable a lot of cool parametric products, and where I think brokers and insurers need to think creatively around how they can partner with them to try and create parametric products around it. So, I mean, I was at a Google sort of climate event a few weeks ago, and they were talking about AI for biodiversity, right? And how you can now use AI combined with satellite imagery and all these things to sort of measure biodiversity impacts. So then you could potentially create products around improving or reducing biodiversity when you're as a company. But equally, there was someone there who had created an AI tool around energy efficiency of buildings, and they want to map every single building in the world and be able to then, see how much energy that building is using, so that you can reduce its carbon footprint. Maybe there's something related to that you could kind of create a parametric product around when it comes to emissions, for example. So I think there's a lot of cool things happening in the space, and if you think about the application for insurance, there's a lot of great stuff that can come out of parametric and AI right now.
I think a lot of insurers, big insurers worldwide, are investing in AI and investing in AI companies to help them make that next move into these products that are not traditional insurance products and are going to need different technology to really reach the masses.
Another kind of, if you look at opportunities in this space, the huge floods in Kenya over the last couple of weeks, and they'll probably continue. The most impacted are people living in informal settlements. What's that going to do? Impact their livelihoods. You're going to get literally washed away. If there was a parametric product for communities and informal settlements that said, if you have X amount of rainfall in 24 hours, there's a cash transfer of X to help you mitigate that, at least get back on your feet. That's exactly the kind of thing which Parametric should be being used for by donors and government. So that's one point there.
Thank you panel. Very much looking forward to networking after the next session. Cheers, Rishi, over to you.
Thank you so much to Kshitij and Alex, Matilda and Carla for setting the scene. We've got the difficult task of holding you here with your attention before drinks are served, so we'll try and make sure we get through everything very quickly. My name is Rishi Raithatha. I'm the co-chair of the Financial Inclusion Forum. In my spare time, I work at the GSMA, which is the which is the Mobile Industries Trade Association. There, I work on something called mobile money. Some of you have already talked about it. Some of you will find out about it later when I've got a drink in my hand. And I also work as a consultant in the climate and disaster risk financing space. I'm joined by three fantastic panelists. I'm going to introduce them for you. So we've got Andrea Camargo, who is the Micro and Meso Insurance Programs Leader at the WFP. Is that right? Perfect. We've got Emma Carnahan, who is the Head of Public and Private Partnerships at AON UK. Spot on? Great. And we've got Kip Koskei, who is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Policy at the Insurance Development Forum. Perfect. I'll give you my time. Sorry, I should have told you. Yes, thank you. I did my homework. So our panelists here have got over 6 decades of experience in insurance between them. I have.
Thanks for that clarification.
Very important. I've got about 6 questions, so let's see if we can get through that in good time. I'm just going to ask you a quick question before we get to the actual questions. If you could sum up your role in one sentence, what would that be? What do you do?
Well, I work with WFP, and I think that sorry. I think that well. Thanks. So yes, I work for WFP, and I think that the role that we play with this topic is as an enabler. We enable the development of these type of solutions to promote security.
Perfect.
One sentence aside. So I work for the Insurance Development Forum, and for those who don't know, the forum is exactly as the name sort of suggests, a forum bringing both the private sector and the public sector together, working on the financial inclusion sort of space. If I have to summarize what I do, essentially it's that bringing and sort of colliding this public-private worlds together and making them sort of try and speak the same language, which is sometimes difficult.
So it says Head of Public-Private Partnerships for us at the moment, or for me, it's working with the non-sovereign NGOs and actually finding ways to enable the private sector to step in and provide more capacity. And basically, very crudely, Andrea's heard me say this, put more money in the system, whether that's through risk transfer or crowding in private sector finance from de-risking.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Since you answered the question last, let's stay with you. I wanted to, sorry. So I just wanted you to tell everybody a little bit about the role that your organization has played in climate resilience, especially when it comes to vulnerable populations. And I'm keen to start with you because Kshitij is right. I have absolutely no idea what AON does in this space, and I've been around the block for a little while. But also, if there's any initiatives as well that you're keen to mention that you're proud of, that'd be great.
So, I think, and then, do I call you Anand? I mean, we call you Anand. Yeah, okay. I know, the rest of us can't, so we get the simple one. And it's quite something when you're known as one word in a company of 44,000. When you say Anand in AON, everybody knows who you're talking about. So Anand talked a lot about what we're doing on the microinsurance. I think what is lost is what we do at the more scaled level. And I, in particular, am proud of what we're doing on the humanitarian sector side, because it takes a lot of institutional commitment, and I think that's something that's lost when you're talking about these sorts of programs. They take time, they take a lot of effort for not a lot of what some would say reward. So I'm really proud of the way AON steps into this and has that institutional commitment. Out of that, we have done a first ever deal with the International Federation of the Red Cross, which was protecting the Disaster Response Emergency Fund, albeit not with parametric insurance. But that has enabled the local national societies respond to more events, and these are small events that don't necessarily hit the papers. So that was the first one, and out of that, also we're working with an organisation called Staff Network, who uses a lot of parametric insurance, but what we're doing is helping them find more access to capital so they can do more. And so that's sort of more, I guess, my role, and what I'm particularly proud of AON, that they have that commitment to not only do some of the stuff that gets them more immediate, but to sort of lean in and do bigger stuff. And we do other things like World Bank cat bonds and stuff like that.
We can talk about that.
We can talk about that.
No, thanks for that. I mean, Kip, you work for the IDF. You guys do some seriously cool things if anyone's read your annual reports.
If you've gone through the
I did.
100 plus pages of the annual report, please unprinted. So just to complement what Emma said, so Emma said the humanitarian side, so I want to sort of focus on the more the sovereign side. So as IDF, we sort of bring, as I said, the private sector together with the public sector to sort of co-create products to work with, to solve some of the problems that countries are asking us for. And it's important. I think we focus so much on the product, but we don't focus enough on who the actual beneficiaries are, or who's asking for this product. So, for example, we have the largest working relationship with the UN body, and that's through the industry sort of coming together and working together. So, working with UNDP and the insurance industry, we have this program called the Parametric program, where the target is to work with 20 countries by 2025. We are at 23 countries right now, developing various solutions, both parametric and indemnity. For example, in Peru, we're developing solutions for schools and how to sort of protect from both flood and earthquake. Similarly, in Accra and Ghana, flood on a parametric sort of basis. And then on the Thailand side, for example, we're looking at public asset insurance on a larger scale throughout the whole country. So that bringing hundreds of people together, working in different countries, sort of supporting that piece of work where governments are asking what the industry can do to actually help them solve a critical issue, and bringing the insurance industry to the forefront of the conversations. I think historically, banks and other financial institutions such as the SMA have been sort of the forefront, but the industry sort of coming to the forefront of this conversation is quite important. So yeah, that's one aspect that I'm sort of proud of, that the industry sort of shaping up, including as well.
Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I will respond to your question by breaking it a little bit in pieces, because probably for some of you it's quite strange that an organization like the Welfare Program works in insurance, and we have been doing this for a while. So probably I will start by saying, okay, yes, our mandate is effectively to promote food security and ensure that we provide food assistance, and for us insurance is actually a mechanism to do that. So I really want to go to that path, because sometimes it's not really easy to understand why WP does this work. So we work in insurance because we do most of what you are also doing IDF and AON. We work on the sovereign side, the humanitarian side, because we believe that effectively insurance provides payouts that help governments and help WP to have funds to finance response. And it's a very important work that we're doing with ARC, Replica, for instance, and we are replicating as well these kind of models in the Pacific and also in the Caribbean. But also an important area that we are working since 2009 actually is on the micro and the meso level side, which is effectively bringing insurance and promote access to insurance to populations who generally do not have this kind of services, in order to be able to address these events that will push them to hunger, which is effectively what we really want to focus. So these, I think, that help us to understand, okay, why WP works in this and why index insurance, because I think that the topic of this is that one. Index insurance is intended to provide payouts quickly. I think that, Matilda, you mentioned that. And we, as a humanitarian organization, we need quick response. We need quick attention to our beneficiaries, and also we need the governments to do so. So effectively, index insurance serves as a tool to achieve that goal.
And mobile money helps to pay out quickly.
Can I step in? Because I just need to do a little bit of a shout out to the traditional market, because I think there is a real risk of parametric index being looked at as the solution, the only solution, and I think it's really important to understand that it's a tool within a box of solutions, and that in circumstances it is the right solution. But you've got to remember the basis risk. That is very rarely talked about, and with that basis risk comes reputational risk. And so it's really important to understand exactly what the trigger is, because if you get it wrong and you're out by a millimetre, like it's a millimetre of water, you don't get the money. And that can be quite a big reputational issue. I think also the other thing about speed, and Sam's right, it's quick, but we have a 10-day turnaround for direct. So I think the industry, whilst traditionally has a reputational issue, actually isn't as bad and can be quite creative. And so I think, we all have to just not... I spend a lot of time with organisations who want to go into insurance, who know nothing about it. And I think what's really, really important is that you understand your problem. And with the problem, you understand the impact that you want to create, and you understand the distribution by which you're going to do it. Morocco got 275 billion, but it didn't get to anybody. It's still sitting in government because government's deciding what the priority is, not going to the people who lost their houses. And so I just think we just have to temper some of these conversations around index insurance to say it is a solution for a type of problem, and it's not the be all and end all. And it's really important to put it in a toolbox and in a bouquet of solutions to create the impact. Because I think impact definitely gets lost on the private sector side. And we spent a lot of time last week, we had a session here at AON helping a lot of these organisations understand insurance. And this idea of impact came up. And how you're creating that impact is really important, how you're getting money into the system. So I just need to shout out for the old boys because it's not as bad, and I think they have one thing that together the two types of products can do is create scale, and that's what we're trying to do with Start Network. That's what reinsurance does, is bring capital to support them for some of these products. But I don't think that they're the be on it.
Rishi, can I?
Sorry, I'm interrupting you. I was just wondering how long it would take for Emma to after the front call. I thought 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Just to sort of react to the basis risk, and I think it's super important for those who understand it's a difference between the trigger level and what actually happens when actually get on the ground. So, in practice, very important. But I think, and this is me putting on my old institution's hat, which is the African Risk Capacity, which is a pool for drought insurance in Africa, owned by African governments. The key, and I think what Emma sort of mentioned, is what people don't like talking about the bad stuff that happened and don't like learning from it. And I think that's the critical element where we all fail in this space generally. Another case, Malawi. Malawi is very well sort of documented, where one of the first years of ARC sort of placing a policy out, and the whole process of placing a policy is collaborating, working with the government, setting the parameters, looking at which crop is going into there, which index is being used. It happened what the government was putting into the model was completely different to what the farmers were doing on the ground. So the seed being planted was completely different in terms of variety and in terms of what moisture it needed and all those aspects, and that affects the model. And when the model doesn't trigger, the government turns to you saying, guys, what happened? we put everything in there, but when we go on the ground, it's completely different. And that's, I think there's a difference between real and perceived basis risk as well. So you have to do a lot of work. There's significantly more work than the traditional sort of indemnity insurance, where there's all these terms and conditions, blah, blah, blah. People sort of try and understand a bit more, whereas this one, everybody thinks, oh, I have this trigger, if it triggers, that's it. And the learning from that, there's been loads of publications, loads of people understanding what's happened, and similarly to that, the example that was given earlier, pandemics. There was a pandemic one. I'll leave it out because what happened after that, I'm not quite sure. The learning needs to be
Still working it out.
Still working it out.
Can I just
Go ahead.
just to go back to this question?
You're making my job very easy.
Sorry.
I'm enjoying spectating, really.
Yeah, I might say that, in theory, index insurance should do that. And I think that effectively there are several elements that are very complex to implement appropriately index insurance. We, every day when we do a WP, is working with the country offices and with the local partners precisely to ensure that the products that are developed provide value and like this basis risk is appropriately managed. But it takes a lot of time and it requires a lot of support of different stakeholders. It's not only WP on the ground reviewing that, but we work very closely with the private sector. But maybe something else that is very important is not only the product. Index insurance is just a modality of an insurance product. But what makes like the trick here is to bring the money quickly to the beneficiaries. I have like many cases in the 30-something countries that we're managing right now, where we have payouts and the process with the technical service provider went very well. Insurance company had like the money already ready to be distributed to beneficiaries, but we couldn't find the mechanisms to go there. So we cannot put all the eggs in saying that index insurance will make our lives easier and we're going to reach to these goals that we mentioned at the beginning. But there are a lot of elements that need to be put together.
So I should go outside and scratch off Parametric off the name of the event, right? Just say.
I think it's a really valuable tool, and it came out of a lack of data 20 years ago. And I think that's the lack of traditional data or traditional. So you need a couple of things to be insurable, right? And we couldn't always get them right. And so this is where it started with, they call them index warranties. And so it absolutely has a role, but you just got to be so careful how you structure it, and your technical providers, to Kit's point, if they don't understand what's going on in the ground, you're screwed. And I think the insurance industry, interestingly, whilst leading into parametric, is also being a lot more creative about how to provide indemnity without having a traditional insurance policy. So, for example, if I look at what we did for the Red Cross, we used they have an allocation application form that the National Societies put up to the mothership, and that became our insurance policy. And then all of a sudden we had an indemnity, and we thought, and because I think the other problem too is that you have to realise that capital gets cheaper with diversification. So if you want to really go at scale, you've got to have a diversified portfolio. And often you need to be able, you can't do that with lots of different parametrics. So you need to find a way to turn them into an indemnity to bring the capital. So again, it can't be used on its own to create scale. If you think scale is big numbers, if you think scale can be lots of different countries, fine. Lots of different ways to skin a cat. But again, it's absolutely shouldn't be dismissed, but it shouldn't be the only thing thought about.
Great. I mean, we've taken 15 minutes for question one. I'm just going to throw away two of my
I bet a couple.
I mean, yeah, I think so. It's quite possible we have, so I'm a bit torn right now. But let's talk about something. I mean, you've talked about a really good example there, and you've talked about the fact that you talked about 30 countries under your belt. The old saying in the industry is that insurance is sold, not bought. Funny thing is, I actually buy insurance, don't sell it to me. But selling it to vulnerable populations who need it, who are at risk of exposure to the impact of climate change, populations who don't understand insurance, is really difficult. So, what examples have you seen where you think this might stick, and why has that, captivated you? I don't really mind.
Go
I think,
Andrea
yes,
first.
I think you guys can regulate each other.
Yeah. I think Andrea should start.
Yeah, I could start, and I could mention like the flagship initiative of WFP in this sense is the Rural Resilience Initiative. You might have heard about it, where actually we are convinced that insurance is not a standard sort of solution. It's not something that people are craving for, and mostly when we're talking about smallholder farmers who have like literacy levels that are quite low. So what we have been doing is really bring a package of resilience, which is actually what everyone needs. You know? I mean, the insurance needs to be part of that. So we basically bring insurance, but in a package that promotes risk reduction. So for instance, in Ethiopia, we had a program where we work with the government and people who were participants of like the social protection program that was called the PSMP, they were working some extra days of work, and those days were paying access to insurance. But the work that they were doing was actually on risk reduction. So they were building irrigation systems, they were building different activities that will promote that risk reduction. Also, something that we integrate in that package is like promoting access to savings and credit, because we believe that effectively there is not only a problem of access in terms of insurance, there is a systemic problem of access to financial services. So in that sense, we work extensively with different partners, and Susanne is here from our team on digital financial inclusion that precisely works in that respect. Another area that we think that is very important is like people, like everyone, we have dreams, we want to achieve our goals. So in that package of resilience building, we offer interventions to promote productivity. And in this case, I will give you an example. In Mozambique, for instance, we bring insurance savings, but also the provision of inputs, which actually people need in order to start with their activity. So this is how I think that you should really bring insurance, not just like this is a piece of like a big package of protection, and this is what we have been doing.
Sorry.
Should we have a buzzer?
Yeah, exactly. Who's first? I'd just like to compliment Andrea's sort of mention. I think to answer your question simply, no. There's no. I haven't seen a model that's sort of like, unless you're here and you're buying car insurance where it's
That's mandatory.
That's mandatory, yeah. So you have to sort of buy it. But like in the spaces that we operate in, and there's communities which are very vulnerable, very need a lot of hand-holding, there needs, and we're really at the, I'd say right at the beginning. We've been doing this for years, but we're still at the beginning of sort of building that understanding. And I'd like to sort of mention the program that we have working with the B20. It's a vulnerable group of 58 or 59 countries, where there's a definite ask on, we need to understand what data we need, what modeling requirements are there, and Al sitting right at the back there sort of leading some of the work. So for example, I think he was in Costa Rica a couple of weeks ago in terms of how do you measure or factor in nature into some of the government's planning in terms of not from an insurance perspective, but also just putting it in the government's balance sheet in terms of what is nature and what the risk is, but what's the value of nature. Similarly, apply that to what happened in Pakistan with the floods. I think they've just issued a tender for the insurance industry to come and sort of help build models and gaps where the big flood happened a couple of years ago in Sindh province. So I think we're building across both public and private to sort of both understand what gaps are there, to find this elusive market that we're trying to reach, and this sort of small steps that we're taking will sort of help in sort of the understanding of government, but also bringing in the trust. I think that's what's really important that's sort of missing. Sorry.
No. So I'm going to take a little slightly different spin.
I would expect that.
Exactly. First of all, you said trust, and so I think buying and selling anything involves trust. When it comes to vulnerable communities, I think you have to think about who's doing the buying, right? Because there's lots of different ways to help these communities through insurance. I think one of the things, so I was at the SMI yesterday, and we had 3 insurance-related projects around crop and agriculture. Some regenerative farming initiatives in India, crop insurance in Africa, and the third one was economic transformation of 10 million small farm holders. in a program much like delivering a resilience package. And I think they all have different challenges about the buying and the selling. And what we sort of unpicked was they all revolved around who's paying for the insurance, right? So who's paying for it and who's the beneficiary, and they're two very, very different conversations. The second one is to Andrea's point and Kip's as well. What's the role of government? Because if I look at some of the big risk pools that have gone on around the world, which I've worked with a lot of them, whether it's mandatory or voluntary to join that risk pool defines level of success. Whatever you define that level of success is. So the fourth one was, what are the proper barriers to the success of that program, and how do you de-risk that? And I think it's much, when you're thinking about these vulnerable communities, we would pose the question, do they need to know that they're getting insurance? We've got a program that we're starting with some of our big food, agriculture and beverage clients, so the McCain's, Starbucks, these sorts of people, about how they can either facilitate the purchasing of insurance for their small farm holders in coffee or whatever, and I know you do similar programs, or whether they become the beneficiary so that they can keep the money going down the chain. So two different things. So I think it's a very, again, you really have to understand the impact you want to create, and then who's paying for it? Where's the money coming from? Because that's ultimately going to define the success, and that's going to define how you sell it. To Kip's point, that's going to define how you talk to government. We're doing, again through the SMI, a training program for all the governments over the next couple of weeks around insurance and the benefits thereof, etc., etc. And building that trust, because if you don't have trust, it doesn't matter how great the program is and how much money it's going to put in there, you're not getting anywhere. I mean, we all know that in the room, but just to make the point. So I think there are those sort of elements you have to think about.
You'd like to reply?
Yes. No, actually, I want to really piggyback on something that you said, because if everything, we need to be very innovative with this, and we need to identify who has willingness to pay and ability to pay. This is like really what we have to do. And something that we have identified is that effectively sometimes micro models are not the most suitable ones, and what we're using a lot with WP are developing meso models. So I'll give two quick examples so it's clear. So right now we have a very interesting project in Kyrgyzstan where we identified that the pastoralists that we wanted to protect, they didn't have any willingness and ability to pay. We went to the field that it was extremely complex to develop a model in that sense. But something that we identified is that local governments, they had willingness and ability to pay, because actually they have a budget allocation that was specifically on disaster risk financing, and they thought that insurance could be the way. So we developed a model where actually we develop an index insurance product that provides protection for extreme winter and extended winter and also extreme drought. And when there is a trigger, well, the local government will receive a payout, and we work with the local governments to develop a response plan. So depending on the trigger, the government will provide support to the pastoralists in a certain way. And these pastoralists actually are members of the social protection, or they're part of the social protection passport. Another quick example is in Iraq. We're developing an interesting model with MFIs. So something that we are building is like developing a business interruption product that will be an index insurance one, heat waves. It's going to be launching in a few weeks. And here we're bringing the MFIs because what we want to promote is access to credit for women in particular. So this is where we're looking at. We're trying to be innovative and realizing that willingness to pay is not only on the producer, on a small farmer, but it's like in a small entrepreneur, in the value chains, in the government, and all these entities that actually are interested in promoting the resilience and productivity.
And I think the important thing about the MESA level too is that it makes sure that the local government budget doesn't get pulled from their main sort of purposes, right? So that you have a disaster and they're not taking from the education budget and the healthcare budget to deal with the disaster response. And I think the other part of it too is now, when you get into some of the disaster financing, right? So there's, what should the parametric be used for? I think there is a case on an anticipatory action side, which I think is going to become, when we start talking about climate resilience, anticipatory action responses, I think, are going to become much more cost-effective going forward as climate catastrophes become, more frequent, more severe. And it's the anticipatory action that will make a bigger difference, and that's where probably there's a bigger role for index insurance, because then dare I say, the basis risk isn't so dramatic because it's anticipatory and you can find other ways. But again, that's going to have some challenges. We're working on a project now with LSE around what's a decision framework that can be objective so that you can start to price some of these products, because you can't even on an index, yes, on an index, but you need to get some sort of feel for an objective decision framework around anticipatory.
So I've heard lots of interesting words that I've copied onto. You asked the question of who's going to pay for it, and Andre probably took the words out of my mouth. The government will often pay for it, and that's fine, because they're thinking of the impact in this case, which is to try and protect their population or their communities from the impact of climate change, or natural disasters, and so on. One of the things I wanted to try and understand is that you have scenarios where insurance for those who are vulnerable to the impact of climate change can be used to either build a market, which I think doesn't exist, or as a safety net, as you've talked about. But is it possible for it to be used to do both at the same time? And how?
I would say yes, and this is what we have been doing, because most of the, I start by explaining what WP does, and we focus on food and vulnerable populations who generally are on the fringe of this type of support, and generally we work with safety nets. So what we're bringing is bringing insurance in different modalities in order to have access to insurance, and we have to do that with the private sector. We need to develop insurance markets. So ultimately, these solutions are sustainable over time. And that is what I would say that really makes the trick here is the public-private partnerships. Governments need to understand the role of insurance in order to reinforce, for instance, their shock-responsive social protection, which is something that's very trendy that we hear nowadays. And actually, insurance is part of these kind of tools that governments could use in order to make these social protection systems more shock-responsive, and using financial instruments to do that. But also from the industry, it's very important for them to understand as well the mandate of the government, what is their main goal and what they want to do. And we're doing this at WP level, at the macro level, for instance, with ARC, what we do, probably for just very quickly, what we are doing with ARC is that we have a program that is called ARC Replica that basically mirrors the policy that the government has in order to enhance that capacity of the government, so there will be more funds basically to respond in a certain event. And most of the cases, these funds go in order to reinforce social protection for the most vulnerable. And also at the micro level, we're doing that, for instance, with the example that I gave in Kyrgyzstan. So I would say yes, those things need to be in tandem, but it should be a lot of understanding between the private sector and the public sector to create this kind of partnerships to make it work.
Well, Kip, you're the man who helps both sides speak the same language, so...
Tough. So the question's sort of, I think in very simple terms, yes. I think you can't sort of detach one or the other, because the social protection schemes are looking at vulnerable people, but vulnerable people who have income sources, who have definitions of wealth which are not in the traditional sense. So I'm from Kenya, so we have a program, and I say we, but through the World Bank and CEFRI, which is a local reinsurer in the market that sort of targets the vulnerable pastoralists, and their value and the economic value is in their cows and their goats and their sheep. And essentially, through that program, they are part of the social safety net in Kenya. So whenever there's a drought, the government usually pops in some cash, and then through this insurance scheme that's been put in place, then I have to put a heavy caveat on that it's heavily subsidized by the World Bank.
This is the Horn of Africa Drive project.
Yes, the Horn of Africa Drive project. I don't need to explain it, so you know it very well. Essentially, the program aims to bring these people into the financial system in the sense. So not only insurance, but also giving them a savings product, which incentivizes them to access insurance through a regular savings program, and sort of bringing them closer to what the possibilities of what finance can sort of achieve. So that's just one example, but again, just to reiterate, that's taken years to design, working with governments on this. I remember when I was at ARC trying to propose scaling up, having the shock responsive for HSNP and PSNP in Ethiopia. Difficult, and I can say that as a Kenyan, and going to talk to ministers there, it's not the easiest task. It's one, it's a political conversation, because I'll give the last example, and then I'm sure Emma has 50 million figures. For example, the Kenyan government was one of the first sort of governments to take out policies with ARC. Again, perceived basis risk, they pulled out. The minister was hauled in front of Parliament to explain why the product didn't pay out. Because the members of Parliament were from that region where there was a drought who approved that section. So getting them back to do social safety net sort of upscale was difficult, and it's still difficult right now. This is 10 years later. But you can tell, like, building that trust, building that system, but again, we're looking at the most vulnerable. So anything we do, there is no room for risk. So everybody, or at least everybody, wants to see a product succeed, but that's not always the case. There's going to be mishaps, and this is part of the learning that we do, which sort of doesn't happen as much as I keep on saying.
I should just say that that's a really interesting product, because we're here to talk about financial inclusion, and the reason I know about it is because I was asked to do some of the design on the mobile money component. So it's quite cool. You sign up for insurance, you pay through mobile money, but a portion of that goes into a savings account, which is mobile money held, or can be mobile money held, and that's where the subsidy comes in. It sort of is like $2 in, you get a $2 bonus or something like that. The thing I learned from that project is not about the demand, actually, which was insane in the sort of northwest of Kenya. It was the fact that actually there was connectivity, and WhatsApp worked there, because that's how everybody was communicating. That's what it was. They don't have a bank account, but they've got WhatsApp. So clearly we're doing something wrong. But you've got 50 examples or...
No, I have a question, and it's really, I mean, it's piggybacking.
Oh yeah, I can take a question.
No, it's sort of like throwing it out in the air. But I sort of wonder. We spend a lot of time talking about matching risk to capital, and everybody's where it's more efficient. And as Kip has heard me talk endlessly about, I'm a big one for roles and responsibilities, and avoiding duplication, and making sure that the right people are doing what they should be doing. And because I have to deal with the multilateral banks, which is where that comes from. And if you know, you know. But I think I question whether or not there is certain roles in that discussion around the social, the safety net and the resilience and financial inclusion, that there are specific roles that people can play, and it doesn't always have to come down to government to design a program. And I say this because I met an organisation recently who lend out money to refugees here in the UK called RefuAid. And it was started around by this group of women, and they find these refugees who have landed here, and they want to be included. And they help them get accredited for English. They lend them money to get started, to learn the English, find jobs, do all that sort of stuff. And they're not big amounts, but it gets them on their feet. They have a 1% default rate. And so, that's a massive role in resilience that automatically takes them out of that social protection safety net. And then all of a sudden, the really most vulnerable get that assistance that they need. So I don't know the answer, but it just occurs to me that when we start talking about partnerships, there is that sort of role and responsibility of what have you got to offer without having to provide the whole answer that can work very neatly with maybe a dovetail into some of the stuff, the bigger, more social provision net stuff. On that, however, when we talk about it in terms of climate resilience, there has to be some sort of resilience building, a mitigation, and everything that goes with it. Because if we don't have that, the vulnerable population is going to get bigger, climate migration is going to get greater, and we're not solving any problem whatsoever.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Many more questions.
I mean, we talk about some of these interesting problems, and I think, Emma, you mentioned very well that it comes down to whether you have data or not, and thankfully we're now in an environment where there is a lot more data, and Matilda, you spoke that quite nicely in terms of all the different kinds of technologies that are coming in and being trialed or even being launched in some way or the other. Scale is a different thing altogether, of course. But one of the things I wanted to find out, might be the last question to ask, see how I feel. Index or parametric insurance looks like now. It's very different to what it used to look like. I used to hear from Richard Lefley about going to a weather station in Malawi and looking through logbooks and then trying to make sense of somebody's handwriting. Thankfully, that's not the case anymore. And so innovation has changed a lot over the last 10 to 15 years. You mentioned that as well, Andrea. What is it, do you think, that's been driving innovation to date? We know that beyond this, it's going to be the question of the applicability of technology and whether that will be possible at scale and affordably. But up till now, what has driven innovation? Or successful innovation?
Need. Innovation comes from someone needing something and trying to find a solution, and a bit of bravery, quite frankly. That's how I see it. I mean, we talking about crop and agriculture insurance, talking to my colleague who is the expert of all experts, and he said to me, I need to find better data. I just need to find better data. I can't, I can't do just this with maize. And it's that sort of need to just find better solutions to create a better impact. I think that's all that is, and some creativity. I think it's as simple as that. We only got the car because the horses were getting tired. It's what drives us. It's just a need to do it better.
You might have even answered my next question. We'll see. But that's fine, no problem.
Nothing much to add in terms of need, but I think it's not. I think it's evolution. Like we've sort of seen this world come to being. I think looking at the hurricane sort of market in the States, I think Hurricane Andrew, which was in '92 or something like that. 20 years later, we realized the wind speed that was calculated back then was wrong. So better data, better access to different sort of methodologies of calculating things, and the impacts have evolved. Like the climate that was in the early 90s is completely different to now. Like Alex mentioned, floods in Kenya. I've never seen floods like that before, like happen through that. We need to evolve. We need to innovate. So just to echo what Emma said, so the need to sort of see impact, but also just the need is there. The government's asking us to do different things, so we better come up with different solutions.
Right, challenge accepted, I guess.
I'd add to that too is that from an insurance industry perspective, it's a need to stay relevant.
Yeah.
Because if we don't keep evolving and finding new ways to insure, it falls back on the government regardless, and then we're redundant. And so I think there is always an AON, or within the industry, there is a conversation around relevancy. And so it is up to people to push us to stay relevant.
That could be problematic because we wouldn't then have events like this, of course. Andrea.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree about the need, and I'm going to be a little bit controversial. Effectively, in the last 10, 15 years, index insurance and insurance in general has been developed, and technology has been at the core of these, and that's great. But I have to say that I have been in many places where still we are going to certain villages and we see that meteorological stations are being recorded manually. And I would say that the problem is that these kind of developments are not necessarily democratized somewhat. You don't see these kind of developments everywhere. And this is why entities like WP become extremely crucial, because what we want to do is to bring these innovations into places where unfortunately these kind of developments are not there. And with this, effectively, we can bring that those interesting products and so on. But that's, I think, that what I found that is quite complex. Also, and maybe something just to add in terms of like the role of working all together and what IDF is doing. We still struggle to convince private sector to come in with innovative approaches. I think that there is the need as well, for instance, from the development side, for instance, to develop anticipatory action insurance products. So we have like and for whoever is interested, we have a project in Guatemala where we have developed already the model of a forecast index insurance product for drought for local governments. We have like tapped the doors of like so many providers, so many private sector entities that would expect like some support. No, we haven't yet.
In about 15 minutes.
Yeah, I will tap your door later. But unfortunately, we always have this response, oh, this is too risky. That data is not well backed. There is not a lot of historical data here. Oh, the data that you have as WP, yeah, it's relevant, but probably not too robust. So I will call as well for like more, like to keep like these like rolling, basically the ball rolling in terms of innovation, and not thinking that we're right into this static place where everything has been discovered or done.
Well, that's fantastic actually, and it's a good place to call it a day, because I do have an important question, which I really want an answer to if possible, but only one sentence, please. If there's anybody in this room who's thinking about, who's by the way not working in index insurance or parametric insurance or even insurance for that matter, who's thinking about working in the space, a career in the space, what's the one piece of advice that you'd give them? And I'm going to start with you, because some of the closest people I know in the space, and also some of the nicest people I know in the space, either work for the WFP or want to work for them, so clearly you're doing something.
Don't give them the kids.
Your colleague Pedro is by drinking money 3 times a year at conferences, so you're second in the list.
All right, thank you.
No offended.
One word?
Go for it.
Okay, I think that persistence.
Persistence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Curiosity.
Okay.
Oh,
Can you say one word?
don't do it.
Don't do it.
Yeah, same. I mean, it's come and talk to AON.